The Apprentice. In Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, instead of following victims running from a killer, we follow Leslie Vernon trying to become one. And the weirdest part is that he treats it like a professional career. The guy literally lets a documentary crew film all the preparation for his big massacre. Leslie talks a lot, cracks jokes, and even seems charming at times. But behind that friendly personality is someone completely obsessed with the rules of horror movies. He trains physically so he can chase victims without looking tired, studies psychology, and even prepares the setting before the attacks happen. There's a great scene where he explains why slasher killers always walk slowly. According to him, victims panic and end up running exactly where the killer wants them to go. What makes the movie really interesting is that it starts almost like a satire, but slowly turns into real horror. As Leslie's plan starts unfolding, the tone completely changes. His fun personality begins disappearing, leaving only the psychopath behind the mask. The Masked Man. In Nightbreed, Dr. Philip K. Decker seems like an incredibly calm psychiatrist, the type who speaks softly and acts like he fully understands the human mind. But in the shadows, he becomes a serial killer completely obsessed with death. And the scariest part is how he manipulates protagonist Aaron Boone's mind throughout the entire movie. Decker convinces Boone that he himself is responsible for the murders happening in the city. The guy literally manipulates his patient into believing he's gone insane. While Boone struggles to understand what's real, Decker continues killing people behind the identity of Buttonface. And honestly, his look is one of the weirdest in 90s horror. The mask looks like a stitched cloth sack with buttons for eyes and a zipper over the mouth. It's not over the top like many slashers from that era. It's simple, and that's exactly why it's creepy. What makes it even more interesting is that David Cronenberg plays the character. Yes, the same director behind bizarre films like The Fly and Videodrome. And it was a perfect choice. He gives off an unbelievable coldness without overacting. He feels completely empty inside. The movie makes it clear that he doesn't kill because of trauma, revenge, or a curse. He simply enjoys it. The Stranger. In The Wailing, we follow Jong-gu, a somewhat clumsy small-town police officer investigating strange cases in a rural village. Ordinary people are suddenly going insane and attacking their own families. Everything seems to have started after a mysterious Japanese stranger appeared in a forest near town. The most uncomfortable part is that the movie never gives quick answers. The stranger might just be an innocent man suffering from prejudice, or he might be something far worse. As Jong-gu's daughter starts showing terrifying behavior, the protagonist spirals into paranoia, trying to figure out who he can trust. And the villain uses that perfectly to his advantage. Instead of attacking directly, he manipulates people, creates fear, and pushes everyone into acting out of desperation. The film's climax contains one of the most disturbing scenes in modern horror. When he finally reveals his demonic form to a young religious man, the villain appears almost like a classic depiction of the devil: glowing red eyes, horns, and an overwhelmingly terrifying presence. The Commune. In One of Us, the story follows Melanie, a journalist who decides to infiltrate an isolated community after her friend mysteriously disappears. The community lives completely separated from society, on a massive farm in the middle of nowhere, and at the center of it all is Brent, the group's leader. What makes the character so disturbing is that he doesn't seem threatening at first. Quite the opposite. Brent is calm, charismatic, and knows exactly how to talk to people. He gives off the image of a caring man, the kind of person who can quickly make others trust him. And that's exactly where the movie builds its discomfort, because little by little, Melanie realizes everyone there lives under his psychological control. As she investigates her friend's disappearance, the paranoia only grows stronger. The women in the commune seem completely dependent on Brent, almost as if they've lost their own identities. And the movie shows how isolation helps create that. The more time Melanie spends there, the harder it becomes to tell the difference between emotional manipulation and real fear. What's interesting about One of Us is that Brent feels like the cult leaders you see in real-life cases. He doesn't need to raise his voice or explode in anger to control people. Everything happens through influence, psychological pressure, and abuse of authority.
Pull the trigger.
The Program. The brain revolves around a giant alien creature shaped like a brain being hidden inside a secret laboratory. And it's not just any monster, the thing literally controls people's minds through a television program called Independent Thinking. The name sounds intelligent, but in reality it's basically mass brainwashing broadcast on TV. The story follows a rebellious teenager named Jim Majlowski who begins realizing something is seriously wrong in town. While almost everyone becomes obsessed fans of the program, hosted by the mysterious Dr. Anthony Blakely, Jim starts suffering bizarre hallucinations hallucinations and psychological attacks because he resists the creature's mind control. And the movie gets crazier and crazier as the alien brain grows and becomes more aggressive. The monster's design is exactly the kind of thing only the 80s could create. At first, it looks like a giant brain attached to wires and tubes. After attacking a few victims, the creature mutates and develops a grotesque face-like appearance. The Widow. In Blood Widow, the story follows a couple who buy a huge house far from the city to start a new life. The problem is that the property sits right next to the ruins of an abandoned boarding school. And of course, nobody takes the creepy stories about the place seriously until people around the house start disappearing. The person responsible is Tiffany, known as the Blood Widow, a killer who has been hiding inside the school ruins ever since a massacre that happened years earlier, and her appearance is deeply unsettling. The blank white porcelain mask gives the character an eerie look that's hard to stare at. Combined with the black, almost tactical-looking leather outfit, she gives off the vibe of some kind of urban ghost. What's interesting about Blood Widow is that Tiffany isn't portrayed as just another silent killing machine like Jason or Michael Myers. At several moments, she seems emotionally shattered, almost lost after all the violence she's committed. The movie suggests that the abuse she suffered at the boarding school transformed her into that completely unstable figure, the eyepatch. In Silver Bullet, the villain combines two things that are already terrifying on their own: religious fanaticism and werewolves. The story takes place in the small town of Tarker's Mills, where a series of strange deaths begin happening during full moon nights. While the adults panic trying to figure out who the killer is, Marty, a young boy in a wheelchair, starts suspecting the one behind the attacks isn't exactly human. The monster responsible is Reverend Lester Lowe, the local church leader and one of the most respected people in town. During the day, he seems kind and completely composed, but at night, he transforms into a violent creature who believes he's purifying sinful people from the community. The scene that basically reveals everything became one of the movie's most famous moments. During an attack, Marty manages to hit the werewolf's eye with fireworks. Days later, his sister Jane notices the Reverend suddenly wearing an eye patch. And at that point, there's no ignoring the truth anymore. What's great about Silver Bullet is that the movie doesn't turn Lester Lowe into some silent monster with no personality. He's a man consumed by his own twisted beliefs, trying to justify murder as if it were some kind of divine act. The Forest. In the Belgian film Cub, we follow Sam, a shy boy attending a scout camp, where he's immediately treated like an outsider by the rest of the group. During the trip, the camp leaders tell an old legend about a wild boy named Kai, who supposedly lives hidden in the forest. The problem is, Kai actually exists, and the movie makes that clear very quickly. Kai is seen watching the group from between the trees, while wearing a mask made of bark, almost like some kind of forest creature. The boy barely speaks and moves through tunnels and underground hideouts, as if he knows every inch of the place. The most intense thing about Cub is the feeling of being trapped in someone else's territory. The characters aren't running from some unstoppable supernatural monster. They're stuck in a place where the villains know absolutely everything, giving the movie a much crueler and more realistic vibe than many traditional slashers. The Betrayal. In the segment Something to Tide You Over from the classic Creepshow, the villain ends up being more disturbing than many of the movie's supernatural monsters. Richard Vickers is an extremely arrogant millionaire who discovers that his wife Becky is having an affair with Harry Wentworth, but instead of simply killing them, he turns his revenge into a cruel spectacle. Richard takes Harry to an isolated beach and buries him in the sand up to his neck, right where the tide will rise. Then he does the exact same thing to Becky, far enough away so they can watch each other die without being able to help. And of course, he installs surveillance cameras so he can comfortably watch everything happen. The character treats the whole thing almost like a game. It's his calm, polite attitude that makes the situation even more disturbing. What's especially interesting about Creepshow is that Richard Vickers was played by Leslie Nielsen, who later became world famous for absurd comedies like The Naked Gun. So seeing him play a sarcastic psychopath feels surreal today, and unlike many loud, explosive horror villains, Richard often seems completely normal. He talks casually, makes jokes, and acts like a polite host while planning a horrifying revenge. The Truck. In Joyride, the story follows two brothers, Lewis and Fuller, traveling across the United States when they decide to pull a stupid prank using a trucker radio. Pretending to be a woman named Candy Kane, they start messing with an unknown truck driver named Rusty Nail. At first, it feels like harmless road trip humor, until the guy takes it way too seriously. And what makes Rusty Nail such a memorable villain is the mystery surrounding him. For almost the entire movie, you only hear his voice through the radio. A calm, raspy, threatening voice performed by Ted Levine, the same actor who played Buffalo Bill in the Silence of the Lambs. So every time the radio turns on, that uneasy feeling instantly hits. The movie does a great job with the idea of invisible horror. Rusty Nail is rarely shown clearly, but his truck is always nearby. That giant Peterbilt basically becomes an extension of the killer himself, and there are scenes where just the sound of the engine creates more tension than many slashers packed with graphic violence. What's funny is that everything starts because of a childish prank, but Rusty Nail turns it into a terrifying psychological hunt. He manipulates the protagonists, predicts their moves, and plays with their fear like he's enjoying a private game. The traps. In The Collector, we follow Arkin, a thief who breaks into a wealthy family's house at night to steal a safe. But once he gets inside, he realizes someone else arrived before him. The entire house has been transformed into a giant death trap by a serial killer known only as the Collector. The most intense part is that the movie basically turns into a claustrophobic survival game. Every hallway hides another improvised trap, and Arkin quickly realizes getting out is much harder than getting in. The Collector isn't the type of villain who acts impulsively. He's completely calculated. The guy spends hours preparing every detail of the environment before making his move. And that makes everything more uncomfortable because the movie constantly feels like the killer is several steps ahead. Visually, the character works extremely well too. The dark mask covering almost his entire face, leaving only his pale eyes visible, creates an intimidating look without feeling over the top. And unlike many famous slashers, he combines physical strength with insane intelligence. A lot of people compare him to Saw because of the elaborate traps, but the Collector feels even crueler because there's no lesson behind any of it. The tapes. The Poughkeepsie Tapes is presented as a documentary about a serial killer known as the Water Street Butcher, a man named Edward Carver who disappears without ever being caught. And as the police discover hundreds of tapes recorded by him, the story becomes more and more disturbing. Unlike many famous horror villains, Carver doesn't rely on supernatural powers or an iconic appearance. The fear comes from the way he manipulates his victims. The guy changes his voice, wears disguises, and can seem completely normal whenever he wants to. And that makes everything worse because it creates the feeling that he could literally be anyone. The most uncomfortable thing about the Poughkeepsie Tapes is that Edward Carver treats his crimes almost like artwork. He obsessively records everything and seems to get more pleasure from psychologically controlling his victims than from the violence itself. His relationship with Cheryl Dempsey, a victim kept captive for years, becomes one of the heaviest parts of the movie because of the extreme psychological manipulation involved. A lot of people actually believed the movie was a real documentary when it first started circulating online. The mockumentary style felt so convincing that the Poughkeepsie Tapes gained a reputation as one of the most disturbing found footage films ever made. The Seed. In The Seed, three friends travel to a luxurious house in the middle of the desert to spend a relaxing weekend together. But during a meteor shower, a strange creature literally falls from the sky straight into their pool. And at first, nobody understands what it even is. It looks like some disgusting, slimy rock with a horrible smell. As the movie progresses, the creature starts changing shape and becomes increasingly bizarre. Once it sheds its outer layer, it reveals a design that looks like a mix between a sick animal and a poorly formed alien. The monster is uncomfortable to look at, especially because of its huge, glowing blue eyes constantly staring at the characters. The most disturbing part of The Seed is that the creature doesn't rely on physical strength to control the situation. It uses a kind of hypnosis that causes victims to completely lose their sense of danger. Little by little, the friends begin acting strangely, even protecting one another just to ensure the alien survives. And the movie dives deep into body horror, showing the consequences of this biological invasion, spiraling further and further out of control. So, is there another horror movie villain you remember that almost nobody talks about? If so, let us know in the comments so we can make a part 2. On screen is a video where we show horror movie characters you trusted but shouldn't have. Click and watch. I'll see you there.